Hello, and thank you for taking the time to view this presentation, giving a brief overview of hydrogen as a fuel source. The concept of hydrogen fuel has been around for some time, but it has yet to be adopted as a strong candidate for transitional energy dependence. Hydrogen has the potential to be an excellent transition fuel as the energy sector develops green infrastructure and transitions to renewables. So what is hydrogen? Very simply, hydrogen is the smallest known element on the periodic table, and it is a highly reactive element due to its atomic structure and propensity to donate an electron, in which case it forms hydrogen ions. In its natural state, it is a gas. However, it is rarely found in pure forms in our atmosphere. So that means we have to generally extract it or create it somehow. And hydrogen in a flame of pure hydrogen burning in the air, the hydrogen H2 reacts with oxygen O2 to form water, and it releases energy in this process. Hydrogen is kind of likely the next iteration of combustible fuels, as we've gone from early combustion of wood and biomass for energy, and then fuel types have consistently gotten smaller. So we went from wood to coal, and then oil, natural gas. Then we've got methane, and then finally hydrogen, which is the simplest molecular formula of those. So how does hydrogen work? Hydrogen in the form of H2 can be burned in the presence of oxygen, resulting in the release of energy and water. And this energy can then be converted to power our cars, provide electricity, turn a turbine, pretty much anything like that. Siemens Energy uses a proton exchange membrane electrolysis system to separate water into hydrogen and oxygen, essentially taking a liquid water and splitting it on a molecular level to produce two gaseous products, hydrogen and oxygen. PEM electrolysis achieves this by placing a proton exchange membrane between an anode and a cathode and running water through the system, where the electrical charge running through the anode and the cathode separates the positively charged and now reactive hydrogen ions and the oxygen. The combustion process is essentially the same reaction, but in the opposite direction, where the hydrogen and oxygen combine, releasing energy and forming water. Hydrogen has some distinct advantages, certainly compared to other fossil fuels and previous combustible things that we've burned for energy in the past. It has the potential to be a very low greenhouse gas emission form of energy, in part because the combustion process itself is relatively clean. However, this means that the electrolysis process for hydrogen must be coming from renewable energy sources like wind or solar. Because if you're using fossil fuels to get the electricity to separate the hydrogen out, then that kind of defeats the purpose. Another advantage to hydrogen is that it is a very versatile element, and it can be used not just for fuel, but for chemical processing and fertilizers as well. It's used in a lot of industrial processes. It also, very similar to natural gas, has a pretty quick ramp up time. So once it is stored, it can be used relatively quickly to turn a turbine and meet peaking demands when intermittent renewables are unavailable. Part of this benefit comes from the ability to store hydrogen and bank it for later use. And there are numerous ways to store and transport hydrogen, many of which can use existing infrastructure like the pipelines and tanker ships and things like that that we already have for things like natural gas. Some disadvantages: if it is not done properly, there can be a high potential for GHG emission with hydrogen. We have a lot of nitrogen in the atmosphere, so if there is a imperfect burn or not a very clean burning of the hydrogen because of whatever it's being burned in and other contaminants getting in there. It can form various forms of NOx, which is a pretty bad GHG. So that is a significant disadvantage, but it is dependent on how we use it for the most part. Production of hydrogen via electrolysis uses quite a bit of water as well, which is cutting into another obviously important resource. And currently, most hydrogen production relies on fossil fuels, either as a source for the hydrogen, where you're breaking down hydrocarbon chains and pulling the hydrogen out of there, or as a fuel to drive the electrolysis process, like we talked about earlier. There's also, with hydrogen, even if it's stored relatively well, there is the potential for disastrous, high risk explosive kind of stuff, because it is a very reactive element. And you can see here, I have a picture of the Hindenburg, which was filled with hydrogen, a dirigible that was filled with hydrogen. And it had kind of a catastrophic failure back in the day. So hydrogen is also not currently widely used for fuel. So social acceptance is still relatively low. Not many people think of it as a main fuel source at this point. So in terms of implementation, hydrogen can be integrated pretty easily into existing energy infrastructure. The fuel source has been around for a while, but it's not widely implemented. Although that is starting to change. There are a few companies that are focusing on this pretty heavily. They see it as the potential for a whole hydrogen economy. As you can see on this slide here, this is a diagram provided by Siemens Energy, showing you've got this green power electrolysis process here, creating this, they call it e-hydrogen. And then the hydrogen can then be input back into that green power source via gas turbine engines, fuel cells, things like that, and re-electrified. It can also be used in other industries, for the making of steel, cement, foods, base chemicals, as well as in the ag industry and chemical industry as fertilizers, including ammonia. Can also be used for methanol synthesis and subsequently e-fuels, even as far as jet fuel. So it can be integrated into a lot of existing transportation systems as well. We've got rail, road, marine, and aviation systems. So pretty big spread there. Because hydrogen is such a basic component of any traditional fossil fuel, that's kind of why it can be integrated so easily with all of this stuff. It's the same combustion process in essence, with some minor tweaks to existing systems. We can make it a lot more viable long term, and a lot more usable and adaptable as we transition to renewable energy. And overall, those are some great reasons why we should look at hydrogen as a transitional fuel in our shift towards renewable energy. Thank you.